Every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, the bell above the door at Rosie's diner would chime. The regulars didn't even need to look up anymore. They knew it was him. Thomas Chen would walk in wearing his usual faded flannel shirt, the blue one with the small tear near the pocket that he'd sewn up himself. His jeans were clean but worn at the knees, and his work boots had seen better days probably a decade ago. He'd nod politely to whoever made eye contact, then make his way to the corner booth by the window. The same booth, every single day. "Morning, Thomas," Betty would call from behind the counter. She'd been serving him coffee for the past 12 years, ever since she started working at the diner. "Morning," he'd reply with a small smile. That was usually the extent of their conversation. Thomas never needed to order. Betty already knew. Black coffee, no sugar. 2 pieces of wheat toast, lightly buttered. Sometimes, if it was a Friday, he'd add a single egg, scrambled. He'd eat slowly, reading the newspaper he brought with him, occasionally glancing out the window at the quiet main street of their small Indiana town. The bill always came to about $5. Thomas would leave a $10 bill on the table, nod to Betty, and walk out. He never waited for change. He'd been doing this for so many years that Betty stopped trying to give it back to him. "That man is too generous for his own good," she'd tell the other waitress. Linda. Living on a fixed income and still tipping like that. If you asked anyone in town about Thomas Chen, they'd tell you pretty much the same things, quiet, polite, kept to himself. A widower who lived alone in that small ranch house on Maple Street, the one with the chain-link fence and the garden that was always neatly maintained. His neighbors, the Patterson family, had lived next to him for 8 years. Their teenage son Danny would sometimes mow Thomas's lawn in the summer. Thomas would try to pay him, but Danny's mother had told him not to take money from the old man. "He's on a pension," she'd explained. "Just help him out of kindness." So Danny would refuse the money, though Thomas always looked uncomfortable about it. Once, Thomas left a paper bag on their doorstep with fresh vegetables from his garden and a thank you note written in careful, neat handwriting. On Tuesdays, Thomas volunteered at the public library. He'd show up at 9 in the morning and help Mrs. Rodriguez, the librarian, sort books and tidy the shelves. He never talked much, but he was reliable. In 15 years of volunteering, he'd maybe called in sick twice. "I don't know what I'd do without him," Mrs. Rodriguez often said. "He just does the work without any fuss. Never complains. Never asks for recognition." Thomas would stay until noon, then walk 3 blocks to the grocery store. He always used the same worn canvas shopping bags and always checked the discount section first. Betty from the diner had seen him there once, carefully comparing prices on canned soup, calculator in hand. People knew he drove an old pickup truck, a faded red Ford that had to be at least 20 years old. The paint was chipped, and there was a dent in the driver's side door. But Thomas kept it running. He did most of the maintenance himself in his garage, ordering parts from the auto shop and fixing things with his own hands. "That truck's older than my daughter," Joe from the gas station would joke. "But I'll give him this, he takes care of it." Thomas would smile at the joke, fill up his tank, and pay in cash. He always paid in cash. Small bills usually, 1s and 5s mostly, sometimes a 10. The thing was, nobody really knew much about Thomas's life before he came to their town. He'd moved there about 30 years ago with his wife, a gentlewoman named Lynn who'd passed away 10 years back. They'd kept to themselves mostly, living quietly in their little house. Some folks remembered that Thomas used to work, though nobody was quite sure doing what. Something with numbers, maybe accounting. He'd retired about 20 years ago, and since then he'd just been part of the town's background. Always there, always the same. Never causing trouble or drawing attention. The closest thing to excitement involving Thomas was when he'd helped old Mr. Peterson change a flat tire on Route 40 during a rainstorm. Or the time he'd found a lost wallet in the library and turned it in with all the cash still inside. Small, quiet acts of decency that people noticed but didn't make a big fuss about. That's just who Thomas was. At the hardware store, he'd spend time in the clearance section, looking for deals on work gloves or WD-40. At the dollar store, he'd stock up on basic supplies. The cashiers noticed he used coupons carefully cut from the Sunday paper, organized in a small envelope he kept in his shirt pocket. "Wish more people were that organized," one cashier had commented to her coworker. "He knows exactly what everything costs." In the evenings, people would see the light on in Thomas's living room. He'd be sitting in his armchair, visible through the front window, reading or watching television. His house was small, maybe 200 square feet. The paint on the shutters was peeling a bit. The roof looked like it could use some work, but Thomas never complained. He shoveled his own snow in winter, raked his own leaves in fall, tended his garden in summer. He was just there year after year, a fixture of the neighborhood as reliable as the old oak tree in the town square. Then came that Tuesday morning in late September. Betty was setting up the coffee station at 5:45, getting ready for the morning rush. 6 o'clock came and went, no Thomas. She glanced at the door, a little confused. In 12 years, he'd never been late. Not once. Probably just overslept, she told herself, though it nagged at her. Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock. No Thomas. That's strange, Betty mentioned to Linda. Thomas hasn't been in. Maybe he's visiting family, Linda suggested. I don't think he has any family around here, Betty replied, frowning. Thursday morning came. The corner booth sat empty. Betty was actually worried now. She called Rosie, the diner's owner, and told her about it. 3 days, Betty said. He's never missed 3 days. By Thursday afternoon, Rosie decided to drive over to Maple Street. She'd been running the diner for 30 years and knew most of her regulars, but she felt especially protective of Thomas. There was something about his quiet, steady presence that had always touched her heart. She pulled up to his house. His old red truck was in the driveway. The curtains were drawn. Everything looked normal, but something felt wrong. Rosie walked up to the front door and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time, nothing. Her heart was pounding now. She tried the doorknob. Locked. She went around to the back door and knocked there too. Still nothing. That's when she called the police. Officer Davidson arrived within 10 minutes. He'd known Thomas too. Had chatted with him at the diner a few times. Together they went around to the back of the house. The back door was unlocked, Mr. Chen. Officer Davidson called out as they entered. Thomas, it's Officer Davidson. Are you okay? They found him in the bedroom, conscious but unable to move properly. He'd had a stroke. The ambulance arrived quickly. As they loaded Thomas onto the stretcher, Rosie held his hand. He looked at her with frightened eyes but couldn't speak clearly. You're going to be okay, she told him, though tears were streaming down her face. You're going to be just fine. Nobody in that moment, not Rosie, not Officer Davidson, not the paramedics, could have possibly imagined what they were about to discover about the quiet man from the corner booth. Everything was about to change. The emergency room at County General Hospital was busy that Thursday afternoon. Thomas was taken straight to the neurology unit where doctors worked quickly to assess the damage from his stroke. It wasn't massive, they told the nurses. He'd been lucky. If Rosie hadn't found him when she did, though, things could have been much worse. By evening, Thomas was stable. He could move his left side again, though his speech was still slurred. The doctor said he'd need time to recover, maybe a few weeks in the hospital, then rehabilitation. But there was a problem. A big one. Hospital Administrator Karen Mills sat at her desk Friday morning reviewing new patient files. When she pulled up Thomas Chen's admission paperwork, she noticed something odd. The insurance information section was blank. The emergency contact line had a single word written by the paramedics. None. She picked up the phone and called down to the ER registration desk. We need insurance information for the patient in room 307, she said. Thomas Chen. Can someone go talk to him? He's still having trouble speaking clearly, the registration clerk replied. But we can try. An hour later, the clerk called back. He gave us his social security number and said to check with Medicare. That's all he could manage to say. Karen typed the social security number into the hospital's billing system. What she expected to see was a standard Medicare account, maybe a supplemental insurance policy. What appeared on her screen instead made her blink and lean closer. There had to be a mistake. She ran the number again. Same result. Her hands were actually shaking as she picked up her phone. I need you to come to my office right now, she told her supervisor, the hospital's chief financial officer. Something's wrong with our system, or, I don't know. Just come look at this. Robert Chen, the CFO, arrived within minutes. He wasn't related to Thomas, but the shared last name made him curious. Karen turned her computer screen toward him. I ran this patient's social security number for billing, she said. This can't be right. Robert looked at the screen. His eyes went wide. The system had flagged multiple accounts connected to the social security number. Not just bank accounts, investment accounts, corporate holdings, property records. The automated system was showing assets that made absolutely no sense for a man who'd arrived at the hospital in worn-out clothes and 20-year-old boots. "Pull up his admission photos," Robert said quietly. Karen clicked through to the patient photo taken when Thomas arrived. There he was, an elderly man in a faded flannel shirt looking scared and confused on a hospital gurney. "That's really him?" Robert asked. "The same person connected to these accounts?" "According to his social security number, yes." Robert sat down heavily in the chair across from Karen's desk. "We need to verify this. There could be identity theft. Someone could be using his information. We need to call our legal team." By Friday afternoon, 3 lawyers from the hospital's legal department were in Karen's office. They'd run their own searches, made their own calls, checked and double-checked everything. It wasn't identity theft. Thomas Chen, the quiet man in room 307 who couldn't afford new work boots, owned a commercial real estate portfolio worth over $800 million. "This isn't possible," one of the lawyers said, staring at the documents spread across the conference room table. "People like this don't show up in emergency rooms without private doctors." But the paper trail was clear. Thomas was the sole owner of a company called Chen Holdings, LLC. That company owned 43 commercial properties across 15 states. Shopping centers, office buildings, industrial warehouses. The documentation went back decades, showing careful, methodical acquisitions year after year. And it wasn't just real estate. Thomas had controlling shares in 3 manufacturing companies. He owned a private investment fund with holdings in 47 different businesses. The properties he owned employed over 12,000 people. "Does he know we know?" Karen asked. "I don't think he knows that we know," Robert replied. "He can barely speak." "How do we even ask him about this?" That question was answered Saturday morning when a sleek black car pulled up to the hospital's main entrance. 3 people in expensive suits got out. They walked straight to the reception desk and asked for Thomas Chen's room number. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said. "Are you family?" "We're his attorneys," the lead lawyer said, handing over a business card. "From Morrison, Phillips, and Wade in Chicago. We've been trying to reach Mr. Chen for 3 days. When he missed his weekly check-in call, we started making inquiries and discovered he'd been hospitalized." The receptionist called up to administration. Within 10 minutes, Robert Chen was in the lobby shaking hands with Thomas's legal team. "We need to see our client," the lead attorney said, "and we need to understand his current medical status. Mr. Chen has significant business interests that require his attention." Robert led them to a private conference room first. "Before we go up there, I need to understand something. The patient, Thomas Chen, lives in a very modest home. He drives a truck that's falling apart. He uses coupons at the grocery store. But according to our system, he's worth nearly $1 billion. Can you help me understand what's happening here?" The 3 attorneys exchanged glances. The lead attorney, whose name was Patricia Vance, spoke carefully. "Our client values his privacy extremely highly," she said. "What I can tell you is that everything in your system is accurate. Mr. Chen has been our client for 32 years. He built his fortune through careful investments, and he's chosen to live modestly. That's his right and his preference. But why?" Robert asked. "Why live like that when you have access to that kind of wealth?" Patricia smiled slightly. "That's a question you'd have to ask Mr. Chen, and I'd suggest doing so carefully. He's a very private man, and this hospitalization has now compromised that privacy. He's not going to be happy about it." They went up to Thomas's room. He was awake, sitting up slightly in bed, looking out the window. When he saw the attorneys, his eyes widened. He tried to speak, but the words came out jumbled. Patricia walked over and took his hand gently. "It's okay, Thomas. Don't try to talk too much. We know what happened. We're here to help." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. He shook his head slowly, and even with his impaired speech, everyone in the room understood what he was trying to say. They know. Everyone's going to know. By Saturday evening, the news had started to spread through the hospital staff. People couldn't help themselves. It was too incredible. The janitor overheard nurses talking. The nurses told their families. Those families told their friends. By Sunday morning, someone had called the local newspaper. By Sunday afternoon, a reporter named Helen Price was sitting in her car outside the hospital, making phone calls and checking property records. Everything checked out. The quiet volunteer from the library, the man who clipped coupons and drove the old truck, was secretly one of the wealthiest men in the entire state. Helen called her editor. "You're not going to believe this story," she said. Monday morning's newspaper hit the streets with a headline that made everyone stop and stare. Local retiree's secret billion-dollar fortune hidden in plain sight. The article had Thomas's photo, the one from the library's volunteer appreciation page from 2 years ago. He was smiling shyly at the camera, wearing the same flannel shirt he'd worn to the hospital. By Monday afternoon, the phone lines at the hospital were jammed with calls. Reporters from 3 states away, TV news crews, people claiming to be Thomas's long-lost relatives, investment advisors, charity representatives. In his hospital room, Thomas lay quietly, watching the ceiling. His speech was getting better, but he hadn't said much to anyone except his attorneys. Rosie from the diner came to visit Monday evening. She'd brought him soup from the restaurant, even though the hospital had its own food. When she walked in, Thomas looked at her with such sadness that she almost started crying herself. "Everyone knows now," he said slowly, struggling with each word. "Everything's different." Rosie sat down beside his bed and took his hand. "Nothing's different about who you are," she said firmly. "You're still the same man who sat in that corner booth for 12 years. You're still the man who left $10 bills for $5 breakfasts. Money doesn't change that." But they both knew she was wrong. Everything had changed. The secret Thomas had kept for 30 years, the quiet life he'd built so carefully, was gone, and there was no getting it back. Outside his hospital room, the world was buzzing with questions.
How did he do it?
Why did he live that way? What was he planning to do with all that money? And most importantly, who was Thomas Chen really? The answers, when they finally came, would surprise everyone even more than the discovery itself. The town of Riverside, Indiana, had never seen anything like it. By Tuesday morning, news vans were parked along Main Street. Reporters knocked on doors asking neighbors about Thomas Chen. What was he like? Did anyone suspect? Were there any signs? At the diner, Rosie had to hire extra security. People kept coming in wanting to sit in Thomas's booth, asking Betty questions while she tried to work. Was he generous? Did he tip well? One reporter asked, shoving a microphone in Betty's face. "He was a gentleman," Betty said firmly, refusing to say more. But inside, her mind was spinning. She kept thinking about all those $10 bills left on a $5 tab. He could have bought the entire diner 100 times over, and he was leaving her tips like he had to think carefully about it. Mrs. Rodriguez at the library was overwhelmed. People wanted to know what Thomas did during his volunteer hours. Did he talk about money? Did he seem wealthy? He shelved books, she told them, exasperated. He organized the children's section. He was quiet and kind and never acted like he was better than anyone. That's all I know. But even as she said it, Mrs. Rodriguez remembered something that made her pause. 3 years ago, the library had been facing budget cuts. They were going to have to close on Mondays to save money. Then suddenly an anonymous donation came through. $50,000. Enough to keep them open and even buy new computers. She'd never thought about it before. But now, the Patterson family next door to Thomas's house couldn't leave their own home without being stopped by reporters. Danny, the teenage boy who'd mowed Thomas's lawn, was particularly shaken. "I feel terrible," he told his mother. "He tried to pay me, and Mom, you said not to take his money because he was on a fixed income. He was a billionaire, and I wouldn't let him pay me for mowing his lawn." His mother sat down heavily on the couch. She'd felt so good about teaching her son to help the elderly. Now she felt foolish. "He never corrected me," she said quietly. "He just accepted my assumption and let me believe he needed our charity." But then Danny remembered something else. Last Christmas, an envelope had appeared in their mailbox. No return address. Inside was a card with a simple message. "Thank you for raising such a kind young man." There'd been a $2,000 gift card to the store where Danny had been hoping to buy a laptop for college applications. "Mom," Danny said slowly, "do you still have that Christmas card?" She did. They looked at it together. The handwriting was neat and careful. They'd never known who sent it. But now, looking at Thomas's thank you note for the garden vegetables, the handwriting matched perfectly. All over town, people were starting to remember small things. Strange things that suddenly made sense. Joe from the gas station remembered that whenever someone was short on cash for gas, there'd often be a $20 bill found later, tucked under the register or slipped into the cash drawer. He'd always assumed it was him being forgetful, miscounting the till. The owner of the struggling bookstore downtown remembered how, for the past 10 years, someone had been bulk ordering books every month. They'd call in, order 50 or 60 books and request they be donated to local schools and nursing homes. The payment came from a business account, Chen Holdings LLC. She'd never made the connection until now. At the community center, the director pulled out records of anonymous donations, sports equipment for the youth programs, heating system repairs, new kitchen appliances. The checks all came from the same source, a company no one had ever heard of until this week. Thomas Chen, the quiet man in the flannel shirt, had apparently been holding their entire town together, and nobody had known. But not everyone was grateful. Some people felt deceived, angry even. "He made fools of us," said Roger Hendricks at the town council meeting Tuesday night. "We treated him like a poor old man and he was laughing at us the whole time. He never asked to be treated any particular way," countered Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd come to the meeting specifically to defend Thomas. "He just lived his life. We're the ones who made assumptions, but why?" someone shouted from the back. "Why live like that? It's not normal. There's something wrong with a person who has that much money and still clips coupons." The debate raged for 2 hours. Some thought Thomas was a hero, secretly taking care of the community. Others thought he was strange, possibly mentally ill. A few suggested he was cheap and selfish, hoarding money while pretending to be one of them. At the hospital, Thomas was getting stronger. His speech had improved significantly, but he refused most visitors and wouldn't talk to any reporters. His attorneys had stationed security outside his room. By Wednesday, something else started happening. People Thomas had never met began showing up at the hospital. Distant cousins, an ex-business partner from 40 years ago, a woman claiming she'd dated him in college. Everyone suddenly remembered their connection to Thomas Chen. His attorney, Patricia, had to create a list of approved visitors. It was very short. Rosie from the diner, Mrs. Rodriguez from the library, Officer Davidson, who'd helped find him, and Betty if she wanted to come. Betty visited Wednesday evening after her shift. She brought him coffee in a thermos from the diner, even though it was against hospital rules. The nurse pretended not to notice. "The usual?" Betty asked, trying to smile. "Black, no sugar?" Thomas nodded, and for the first time in days he smiled back. A real smile. "Thank you," he said. His voice was almost back to normal now. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Betty spoke. "People are saying a lot of things about you. Some good, some not so good. But I just want you to know something." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "In 12 years, you never made me feel small. You never talked down to anyone. You treated everyone the same. That matters more than all the money in the world." Thomas's eyes got watery. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you." "Tell me what?" "That you're rich?" Betty shook her head. "Thomas, that was your business, not mine. You didn't owe me your life story. You came in, you had coffee and toast, you left a nice tip. That was our relationship, and it was a good one. The money doesn't change that." "Everyone else thinks it does," Thomas said quietly. "Everyone else is confused right now. They'll come around." Betty stood up to leave. "You take care of yourself. And when you get out of here, that corner booth is waiting for you, same as always." After she left, Thomas stared at his coffee. It had gone cold, but he didn't care. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt like maybe things could be okay. But Thursday morning brought a new complication. A man in an expensive suit arrived at the hospital. He wasn't a lawyer or a reporter. He was Thomas's nephew, Richard Chen, from California. They hadn't spoken in 15 years. Richard smiled broadly as he walked into Thomas's room, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Uncle Thomas." "Thank God you're all right. I came as soon as I heard. You should have called me. Family should stick together." Thomas looked at him coldly. "You didn't come to Lynn's funeral." Richard's smile faltered. "I was out of the country business, you know how it is." He sat down uninvited. "But I'm here now, and I've been thinking, you're going to need help managing everything while you recover. I could move back, help you with the business side of things. It's what Lynn would have wanted, keeping it in the family." Thomas said nothing. He just looked at his nephew with tired eyes. After Lynn died, Richard had called once asking if Thomas needed help, sorting out the estate. When Thomas said there was nothing to sort, Richard had stopped calling altogether. "We're family. Richard said again, leaning forward. Blood is thicker than water. The full saying, Thomas said quietly, is the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means the bonds you choose are stronger than the bonds you're born with. Richard's face tightened. So that's how it is. That's how it's always been. You only call when you want something. After Richard left, angry and empty-handed, Patricia came in. I'm sorry about that. We're working on a restraining order for unauthorized visitors. How many more? Thomas asked. 17 people claiming to be relatives have tried to contact you. 12 investment opportunities that require immediate attention. 9 charity requests, and about 30 lawyers who want to help you protect your assets. Thomas closed his eyes. I just want to go home. I know, Patricia said gently. But Thomas, you need to understand. Your old life, the quiet one, that's over. Everyone knows now. When you leave this hospital, nothing will be the same. Thomas looked out the window at the news van still parked below. Patricia was right. His secret was gone. His privacy was gone. The simple life he'd built so carefully for 30 years had been destroyed in less than a week. The question was, what would he do now? 2 weeks after his stroke, Thomas was finally strong enough to have a real conversation. Helen Price, the local reporter who'd broken the story, had been requesting an interview every single day. Thomas's attorneys kept saying no, but then Thomas surprised everyone. Let her come, he told Patricia. Just her. No cameras. No recording. I'll talk. Patricia looked concerned. Thomas, you don't owe anyone an explanation. Maybe not, Thomas said. But if I don't tell my story, everyone else will keep making up their own versions. At least this way, the truth gets out there. Helen arrived Friday afternoon with just a notebook and a pen. She was younger than Thomas expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes. She sat down slowly, like she was afraid he might change his mind. Thank you for agreeing to this, she said. I know it's been a difficult time, Thomas nodded. You want to know why I lived the way I did. Everyone wants to know that, Helen admitted. But what I really want to know is who you are. Not the money, you. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to talk. Really talk, for the first time since everything had changed. I came to America in 1971, he said. I was 20 years old. I had $200 in my pocket and a suitcase with 3 changes of clothes. My family in Taiwan had saved for years to send me here. They believed America was the land of opportunity, and they were right. But they were wrong about one thing. What's that? Helen asked, writing quickly. They thought opportunity meant getting rich was easy. It wasn't, it was hard. Really hard. Thomas stared out the window. I worked 3 jobs that first year. I washed dishes at a restaurant in the morning. I cleaned offices at night. And on weekends I worked at a laundromat, helping people with their clothes. He smiled slightly at the memory. That laundromat changed my life. The owner was old, getting tired. One day he told me he wanted to retire, but nobody wanted to buy the business. He offered to sell it to me for $12,000. I didn't have $12,000. I didn't have $1,200. How did you buy it? Helen asked. I didn't, not at first, but I asked him if I could pay him over time. $100 a month until it was paid off. He said yes. I think he was lonely and liked having me around. Thomas's voice grew softer. It took me 4 years to pay it off. During those 4 years, I learned everything about running a business. How to keep costs low, how to save every penny, how to fix the machines myself instead of calling a repairman. And that was the start of everything? Helen asked. Thomas nodded. Once I owned that laundromat free and clear, I saved everything I made. I lived in a tiny apartment above the laundromat. I ate rice and vegetables. I didn't buy anything I didn't absolutely need. After 3 years, I had enough to buy a second laundromat. Then a third. When did you start buying other properties? 1982. I sold the laundromats and bought a small commercial building. It had 3 retail spaces. I rented them out. The rent was more than enough to cover the mortgage and give me some profit. So I bought another building, then another. Thomas paused. I met Lynn in 1983. She was working at a bank where I went to apply for a loan. For the first time, Thomas's face truly brightened. She understood what I was trying to do. Build something secure, something stable. She grew up poor too in Korea. We both knew what it was like to be hungry, to be scared about where the next meal was coming from. We both promised ourselves we'd never feel that way again. But you kept living modestly even after you became wealthy. Helen said gently. Why? Thomas thought carefully before answering. 2 reasons. First, Lynn and I were happy. We had a nice house, not too big. We had food. We had each other. What else did we need? A bigger house wouldn't make us happier. Expensive cars wouldn't make us laugh more or love each other better. And the second reason? Fear, Thomas said simply. I was always afraid it could all disappear. I'd seen it happen. I knew people who had money and lost it all. So I kept saving, kept investing carefully, never spent more than I needed to. It became a habit I couldn't break. Even after I had more money than I could ever spend, I still clipped coupons, still compared prices, still drove the old truck. Helen stopped writing and looked at him. But you gave money away. We found evidence of donations all over town. The library, the community center, the schools. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. That was different. That was Lynn's idea, actually. She said if we weren't going to spend the money on ourselves, it should do some good. But she also said, and I agreed, that it should be private, anonymous. Because the moment people know you have money, everything changes. And it has changed, hasn't it? Helen asked softly. Yes. Thomas's voice was heavy. People look at me differently now. Some are angry because I didn't tell them. Some think I'm crazy. Others just see dollar signs. My nephew, who I hadn't heard from in 15 years, showed up trying to get involved in my business. I've gotten letters from people claiming I owe them money for things that never happened. Do you regret the way you lived? No, Thomas said firmly. I regret that everyone found out. But I don't regret the life I had. Every morning at that diner was peaceful. Every Tuesday at the library was meaningful. My neighbors treated me like a regular person because they thought I was a regular person. And I was. The money didn't make me special. It was just numbers in accounts I barely looked at. What about now? Helen asked. What happens next? Thomas was quiet for a long time. I don't know. I'm 73 years old. I had a stroke. The doctors say I'll recover, but it's a warning. I won't live forever. Lynn and I never had children. I have no close family that I trust. So what do I do with everything I built? That's a big question. It's the only question that matters now, Thomas said. For 30 years, I just kept building, kept saving. Lynn and I always said we'd figure out what to do with it eventually. Then she got sick, cancer. She was gone in 6 months. I never got to have that conversation with her. His voice cracked slightly. She was the only person who understood why I lived the way I did. The only person who didn't think I was strange. After she died, I just kept going the same way. It was comfortable, familiar. I didn't want anything to change. But it has changed now, Helen said. Yes. And maybe that's not entirely bad. Thomas looked directly at her. Can I tell you something off the record? Helen put down her pen. Of course. I've been lying in this hospital bed thinking about my life. Really thinking about it. And I realized something. I was so focused on never being poor again that I forgot the whole point of having security. The point is so you don't have to be afraid, so you can live freely. But I've been living in fear anyway. Fear that people would find out. Fear that things would change. Fear that I'd lose everything. And now? Helen asked. Now everyone knows. Everything has changed. And I'm still here. I'm still alive. The money's still there. Maybe it's time to stop being afraid. Thomas smiled slightly. Lynn would tell me I'm being ridiculous. She'd say I should have done something meaningful with the money years ago. She'd probably throw a pillow at me for being so stubborn. Helen smiled. She sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was. She was everything good in my life. Thomas took a deep breath. I think it's time I actually do something with what I have. Not for recognition. Not to make people like me. But because Lynn was right. If you have the ability to help people and you don't, what's the point? Do you know what you're going to do? I'm starting to have some ideas, Thomas said. But I need to do it the right way. My way, not because people expect it now, not because I got caught, but because it's what I should have done all along. Helen picked up her pen again. Can I write about this conversation? Thomas thought about it. Yes, but don't make me sound like a hero. I'm not. I'm just an old man who got scared when he was young and never quite got over it. I'm just someone who loved his wife and missed her every day since she died. I'm just a person who liked his coffee black and his life simple. I'll do my best, Helen promised. After she left, Thomas sat alone in his hospital room. For the first time in 2 weeks, he didn't feel completely terrible about everything that had happened. Maybe Patricia was right. Maybe his old life was over. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to build a new one that would make Lynn proud. Outside his window, the sun was setting over the small town that had been his home for 30 years. The news vans were finally starting to leave. Life was slowly returning to normal, but for Thomas Chen, normal was about to mean something completely different. 3 weeks after his stroke, Thomas was released from the hospital. He'd recovered well, better than the doctors expected. His speech was back to normal, and he could walk without assistance. But as Patricia drove him home that October morning, both of them knew nothing would ever truly be normal again. When they pulled onto Maple Street, Thomas noticed immediately. Someone had painted his fence. The Patterson family was in their yard, and they waved. Not the awkward, uncertain waves from before, just regular friendly waves, like they used to. Inside his house, everything was exactly as he'd left it. The same worn furniture. The same modest kitchen. Patricia had arranged for a cleaning service, but Thomas could tell they'd been instructed not to change anything. Even his newspaper from 3 weeks ago was still on the coffee table exactly where he'd left it. "I'll check in tomorrow," Patricia said at the door. "But Thomas, before I go, I need to tell you something. The requests haven't stopped. Charities, investment opportunities, people wanting meetings. My office has been fielding hundreds of calls. You need to make some decisions about what you want to do." "I know," Thomas said quietly. "Give me a few days. I'm working on something." That evening, Thomas did something he hadn't done in 10 years. He opened the closet in the bedroom he'd shared with Lynn. Her clothes were still there, just as she'd left them. He'd never been able to give them away. On the top shelf was a wooden box. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Letters Lynn had written but never sent. It was something her therapist had suggested during her cancer treatment. "Write down your thoughts, your wishes, your fears," Lynn had written to Thomas, knowing he'd find them someday. Thomas had read them once right after she died. Then he'd put them away. It hurt too much. But now he took them out again. He sat on their bed and read through the night. One letter, dated 2 months before she passed away, made him stop. "My dearest Thomas," it read, "by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know you. You'll want to keep everything the same. You'll live in our house, drive our old truck, keep our routines. You'll think that by keeping everything the same, you're keeping me close. But Thomas, that's not living. That's just existing. I don't want you to forget me, but I also don't want you to stop living because I'm gone. Do something big. Do something bold. Do something that scares you. That's how you honor a life, by living yours fully. I love you, always, Lynn." Thomas read it 3 times. Then he picked up the phone and called Patricia. "I know what I want to do," he said. "Can you set up a meeting with the town council? I want to make an announcement." The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at the town hall. Word spread quickly. By Monday evening, every seat was filled. People stood along the walls. Local news crews were there, despite Patricia's request for no media. Thomas arrived in his old red truck. People noticed. Some had expected him to show up in a limousine now that everyone knew the truth. But there he was, in his flannel shirt and worn jeans, parking in the same spot he'd always used when he came to the library. Inside the town hall, the room got quiet when he walked in. Mayor Davidson, no relation to Officer Davidson, stood up and shook his hand. "Thomas, thank you for coming. The floor is yours." Thomas walked to the podium. His hands were shaking slightly. He'd never been comfortable speaking in public, but he thought of Lynn's letter and took a deep breath. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, "so I'll just say what I need to say plainly. For 30 years I've lived in this town. You've been my neighbors, my friends. You've treated me with kindness even when you thought I was just a poor old man, especially when you thought I was just a poor old man. That kindness meant everything to me." He paused, looking around the room. "I know there's been a lot of talk these past few weeks. Some of you are angry with me. Some think I'm strange. Some probably think I'm crazy for living the way I did. That's okay. I understand. But I want you to know why I'm here tonight." Thomas pulled out a folder. "I'm establishing a foundation. It's going to be called the Second Chance Foundation, named after what my wife and I believed in, that everyone deserves a second chance to build a better life." He opened the folder. $500 million will go into a permanent fund for this town and this county. The interest alone will generate about $20 million every year. Forever. The room erupted. People gasped. Someone started crying. Thomas waited for the noise to die down. Here's what that money will do, he continued. Free job training for anyone who wants to learn a trade. Plumbing, electrical work, carpentry, welding, computer programming. Whatever skill you want to learn, the foundation will pay for it. Small business grants up to $50,000 for anyone with an idea. You don't have to pay it back. Scholarships for every high school graduate who wants to go to college or trade school. Full tuition, books, housing, and medical bill assistance for families who are struggling. Mayor Davidson stood up again. Thomas, this is extraordinary. But surely you'll want some recognition. A building named after you, a statue, something. No, Thomas said firmly. That's the one condition. My name doesn't go on anything. No buildings. No plaques. No statues. The people who receive help won't even know the money came from me. The foundation will just be called what it is. Second chance, but why? Someone called from the crowd. Thomas thought about how to answer. Because that's not why I'm doing this. I'm not doing it for recognition or to make people think better of me. I'm doing it because my wife believed in helping people, and I should have done this years ago. I'm doing it because I had a second chance when I came to America with nothing, and I want others to have that same chance. He looked around the room. And honestly, I'm doing it because I'm 73 years old and I finally realized something. You can't take money with you when you die. All you can do is decide what it does while you're here. I'd rather it help people build better lives than sit in accounts doing nothing. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up from her seat. Thomas, can I say something? Of course. You've been helping this town for years. We just didn't know it. The library donation, the community center, all of it. You never asked for credit then either. This is who you've always been. Her voice cracked with emotion. Thank you. From all of us, thank you. The room broke into applause. Thomas looked uncomfortable with the attention, but he nodded his appreciation. After the meeting, people wanted to talk to him, shake his hand, thank him personally. But Thomas was exhausted. Patricia helped him slip out the back door. You did good tonight, she said as they walked to his truck. Lynn would have done it better, Thomas said. She was always better at this kind of thing. I think she'd be proud of you. Thomas looked up at the stars. I hope so. The next morning, Thomas woke up early. He got dressed in his flannel shirt and jeans. He climbed into his old red truck and drove to the diner. It was 6 a.m. When he walked in, the bell above the door chimed. Betty looked up from behind the counter. For a second, neither of them said anything. Then Betty smiled. The usual? She asked. Please, Thomas said, sliding into his corner booth. She brought him black coffee and 2 pieces of wheat toast, lightly buttered. Thomas read his newspaper. When he finished, he left a $10 bill on the table. Thomas, Betty called as he stood to leave. You don't have to keep doing that. I mean, you don't need to. It's not about need, Thomas said gently. It's about what's right. You do good work. You deserve a good tip. Betty nodded, tears in her eyes. Same time tomorrow? Same time tomorrow, Thomas confirmed. Outside, Danny Patterson was getting into his car for school. He saw Thomas and jogged over. Mr. Chen, I just wanted to say thank you for everything, for letting me help you all those years. It taught me a lot. You're a good kid, Danny, Thomas said. Don't let anyone tell you different. As Thomas drove home, he passed the library. Mrs. Rodriguez was unlocking the front door. She waved. He waved back. Life in Riverside was slowly returning to normal. The news vans were gone. The reporters had moved on to other stories. People still talked about Thomas Chen, of course. But now they talked about him the way you talk about someone you know and respect, not like he was some strange curiosity. Thomas pulled into his driveway. His modest house looked the same as always. The fence was freshly painted now, but everything else was unchanged. And that was okay. This was his home. This was enough. Inside, he made himself lunch. Rice and vegetables, like always. While he ate, he thought about Lynn, about the life they'd built together, about the foundation that would help people long after he was gone. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who'd been scared and finally found the courage to stop being afraid. A man who'd loved his wife and wanted to honor her memory. A man who believed in second chances because he'd been given one himself. That afternoon, Thomas worked in his garden. His neighbors saw him there, tending his tomatoes in his old clothes, looking just like he always had. Because despite the billions of dollars, despite the foundation, despite everything that had changed, Thomas Chen was still the same person, quiet, humble, content, and finally, truly at peace.